I'm so excited for today's tutorial. I know I probably say that every video, but I really am today. I have been sewing older patterns this week that I like, some of my favorite patterns. But after a while of sewing things over and over again, I get really antsy to try something new. So today's tutorial is a new pattern for me. This is the On the Go makeup bag from Sewn Ideas. I've had this pattern for a while. I love the way it looks, and someone asked me, they said, have you sewn that one before? And I said, no, I haven't, but I'm going to add it to my list right now. I can't wait to make this. Reading her the pattern, it looks like it's going to be a really fun sew, and I already decided to do a lot of things differently on it just to fit what I'm wanting. I'm making this as a gift. My great nephew is the only baby in our family currently, and so we tend to spoil him quite a bit. We are having our annual Halloween party soon, and I'm making this for him as a gift. So instead of it being a makeup bag, this is going to be kind of a carry bag for some toys. I'm going to put some crayons in it, some drawing supplies. I'm going to put a couple of cards, just fun things we can play with, and something he can carry around and keep his toys close to him. I'm using fabrics from K&A Custom Fabrics. I'm using one piece of vinyl. I'm using sewing string from Wizardry. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day to watch this video, and let's start making this pattern. The first thing I'm going to be working on in this pattern is making that brush holder section. Now for me, mine's not going to be a makeup brush holder. It's going to be for crayons, markers, things like that. So let's break down those pieces and kind of talk about the changes I'm making. You're going to have a flap. This flap will be able to lift up. I have mine clipped right sides together right now, but you will be able to lift the flap up and you will see the brushes there. This flap is meant to protect the rest of the bag. So the flap isn't really 100% necessary for mine, but I love the way it looks, so I want to do it. In the pattern, she tells you you could cover this piece with vinyl or your flap with vinyl just for protection so that it can be wiped down easily if the makeup leaves a residue or anything like that. Also, you could use something like a waterproof canvas to be able to wipe it down easier too. Wanted to bring up those two things. I am using a cotton canvas for all of my pieces. I have everything interfaced with just a SF101 right now. So the pieces I'll be working on for this will be the number 7. That's going to be that makeup brush flat pieces. I'll have 2 of these. I will have piece number 5. And then we will have this slip pocket piece that I have clipped wrong sides together, just folded in half, which is number 6. So to construct this pocket, first I will top stitch along the top of this slip pocket piece. Then I will baste it in place to the number 5 piece. Then I will separate the slip pocket into 3 different compartments. You don't have to, but if you're doing the makeup brush version, you would definitely want to. For the version I have in mind, I want to as well. You could even just sew a line down the middle if you would want to have only 2 compartments, but I'm going to do the 3. After we have that part done, then I will sew the flap, which means I'll have them clipped right sides together. Start at the top back stitch, go all the way around, leaving this top unsewn, and then I will probably use my pinking shears to notch the edges on these curves. So this will be the first things I do to get my pattern started. Since I have my top stitching done, I'm just going to clip this pocket onto the number 5 piece, and then I'm going to baste around the side and bottom edges of the pocket. You can draw the lines on, measure, have everything perfect. I'm not too worried about it. I'm just going to sew 2 lines. I will start from the bottom to go to the top. If you start from the top, sometimes it can kind of push it down and you'll have a pucker at the bottom. So I always try to remember to start from the bottom, sewing down. Definitely want to back stitch here. You could even do a rivet here on each side of that sewing line if you wanted to make it a little cuter. Just as a side note, the pattern does give you the measurements to measure in. I'm just being lazy and not fooling with measurements. So now that I have that part done, let's go ahead and sew around the sides and the bottom of the flap. I used my pinking shears to kind of get some of the extra bulk around these bottom curves. Didn't worry too much about the top. And now I'm going to flip this right sides out. Here is how my flap looks. When I cut my flap pieces, I made sure that the one that you would see as soon as you open the bag had the print going this way. And I kind of fussy cut, or didn't fussy cut perfectly, but try to make sure I had one kind of design that I wanted more in the center. And then for the other side of the flap that would be lifting up, I made sure that I had the directional print going the correct way. So they are going opposite. So on the front piece, your print will be going down towards the curved edge. On the piece that's going to be on the inside, the print will be going down to that straight edge. Just think about that if it matters, or use a non-directional print. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and top stitch and then baste all around this piece. After you have this top stitch, what we're going to do is we're going to center on the top of this piece. So my exterior piece, or the piece I want to see whenever I open my bag, is going to be right sides up. This is what mine looks like. I'm going to go ahead and baste across that top. Before I put this aside, I want to mention, do a common sense check. We definitely don't want that flap to be caught in the seam allowance. So I can look at it and see I have plenty of room to sew the other pieces aside. If for some reason something's wrong and your flap is covering or even larger than this pocket piece, you would definitely want to check your measurements, check your pattern pieces, make sure you have the correct ones for everything. I'm going to set this aside until we need it later. We have two other sets of flat pockets. Pattern piece number 2, pattern piece number 1. For pattern piece number 2, let me open this up. This is going to be the inside pocket for the flap. I know that might sound a little confusing, but it's just going to be an extra pocket area on the lining flap piece. So what we're going to do with this one is we will clip it right sides together, but we'll do the exact opposite of what we just did with the last flap. On this one, we will only sew across the top. So back stitch when you start and stop, and let's go ahead and sew these two pieces together along the top. Go ahead and finger press that seam open, or take it to the iron and press it flat. And then flip these fabrics so they are wrong sides together. Definitely making sure you roll that seam until it's flat. I'm going to put some clips in place to help mine to lay the way I want it to. After clipping it, go ahead and top stitch, and I'm top stitching from my exterior, or what I'm considering the exterior or right side of this number 2 flat piece. On the other side, I don't have any print at all, so make sure you are understanding that one will be seen, the other will not. It'll be kind of like a slip pocket. For your number 1 piece, you're definitely going to have an exterior and a lining. On my exterior piece, this is the only one that I've attached anything to besides an SF-101. I attached a layer of Thermolan, and I have kept it out of the top seam allowance. It's in the seam allowance around the sides and the bottom, but this top portion, and the pattern tells you about how much of a gap you will have there, you will not have any interfacing there along that top flat straight edge. My exterior flat piece number 1 with the fleece attached, I'm not using just yet. I'm setting it aside. For the lining piece though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to baste this inside pocket in place. I'm matching up those curved edge. You can see we can have a gap there at the top. Add some clips. Before I sew this, I'm going to flip this around. And I'm actually, and you can see my print is going the right way because this is going to be how the flap looks when it opens. So I do have my directional print correct on this one as well. But before I base this in place, I'm going to pull out my connector. You have two options given to you in the pattern for how to close this bag. The other option the pattern gives is with D-rings if you don't have these side release buckles. Two options in the pattern. This piece, and I have both of these attached, you really only need the female portion, but I'm going to go ahead and have them both clicked into place so I don't lose this piece. I'm going to center on the top along the curved edge. This is how this piece looks. I'm going to start basting on the side and then go all the way around. I'll backstitch a time or two here across this connector piece and then go the rest of the way. I'm going to have a little bit overhanging on my webbing just for some extra security. I'm going to go ahead and attach these two pieces together. This is not the step called for in the pattern. You are to attach this later. You're supposed to attach the zipper pocket first. But I'm going to go ahead and do it just because I just get super excited. So I am going to take this lining flat piece we just sewed, place it right sides together on the right side of this pocket piece, and I'm just going to clip these together and sew them together with the seam allowance given in the pattern. Here is that sewn edge. Let's just flip this back and then let's sew on this lining flap. That's the #1 lining piece. Top stitch all across there, and that will attach the flap back to that seam to have everything laying nicely. This already looks so cute. So we already have our slip pockets there. We have an extra pocket here. I'm going to go ahead and grab out the next piece. We'll start working on that zipper pocket. I'm going to start working on the zipper pocket next. So we will need pattern piece #4, that is a cotton woven, pattern piece #5, the part that is a clear vinyl, and then you're going to have, I think these are called your top and bottom zipper bands, zipper pieces, I'm not for sure, but the pattern gives you the measurements for these two pieces for the zipper, and so you will have to cut and measure those two pieces. But these are the pieces we'll need to construct that zipper pocket. First thing we do is we take our clear vinyl piece, and I'm using a PVC, so mine's a little bit stiffer. I typically work with the TPU. I have this band as a 4-way fold, which is what the pattern tells us to do, and I just had it clipped overnight because I didn't feel like ironing it. But you can see that I have a line drawn down the middle, the long raw edges folded to that middle, and then folded again. This just creates a piece of double fold tape, and so you can use pre-made if you have it. You can make your own. There's so many different things you can use. You could just use a piece of waterproof canvas folded together instead of the 4-way fold. But what you do is you just slip that vinyl piece to the middle, to the center, and then fold your piece of binding around it, so that it just encases that entire top edge. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to top stitch all the way down this closest to the folded edge. So about 1/8 of an inch away all the way across the bottom. I'm going to start sewing before I'm on the vinyl to go ahead and establish the stitches and help me go to the vinyl. I'm not sewing on the vinyl any, so I shouldn't have any problems, but if you do have problems, just adjust your tension on your machine. I have that first row of top stitching done. Now I'm going to pull out my #5 zipper tape. This is from So Majestic, and I'm just going to center this piece on here. I always cut my zipper tape a little bit longer than I need to give me plenty of room to add the pull. My pull is not attached yet. I'm going to have this finished edge about 1/4 of an inch away from my teeth. You could use double-sided tape if you want, but I always just feel like it's best to just kind of lay it on top, make sure it's centered and you have plenty of room on both sides, and then I sew it and adjust as I need to. If this makes you uncomfortable, definitely use tape, glue, whatever, pins, clips, whatever you feel comfortable using to make the sewing experience better for you. So you'll be sewing 1/8 of an inch away from my gray binding, this gray folded edge here, but I will keep the gray about 1/4 of an inch away from the teeth. This is how I have mine attached. You can also do a line down the middle if you want for extra security to make sure this stays really nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. The next thing we're going to do is attach the piece number 4 and that top band piece. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to center up the sides of the vinyl with that number 4 piece and then match it with the top edge of the zipper. So you'll have to match 2 things, the sides and the top. So I'm going to add a few clips once I get it in place, just so it's not going to shift anymore, since I'm really going to be watching the sides and the top. I'm going to go ahead and baste that in place. If you want, you could go ahead and add this on top, right sides down, to sew them all at once. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to baste first, and then I'm going to come back and add this piece right sides down and then sew across it with the full seam allowance. After you have all these sewn together, go ahead and flip up the top band only, finger press it into place, and then we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away on this piece. I'm going to go off camera now that I have that sewn. I'm going to add the zipper pull and trim everything up. I'm going to cut this clip in, even though I've already sewed this. I had decided already that I wasn't doing this step, but I forgot to mention to you that it's an option. When you have this clear vinyl pocket, the designer tells us that we can make this clear vinyl expandable. She gives you options for kind of making a pleat so that you have extra depth at the bottom to have more room to store things in. So she gives those steps. I had already decided that I wasn't going to do it, that I was going to leave mine just a flat pocket, but I forgot to mention that. So I wanted to add this clip in where I discussed that you can do those steps, and that's why you have extra room at the bottom to make that pleat, so that you can have that option of having more room to store things in. Check out the pattern, follow those measurements for that. I am not doing that option on my version. Now that I have this pocket trimmed down to size, I'm going to baste down both sides and across the bottom, and then we're going to attach it to the other piece of the lining. Now that I have that basted closed and my zipper pull is on, I'm going to attach this free edge. I'm going to attach this free edge to the bottom of my pocket. So what I'll do is I will place these right sides together. You can clip in place, and then you're just going to sew all the way down this edge with the seam allowance given in the pattern. Be careful with your zipper pull. I notice mine's trying to come through, and you want to make for sure when you get close to it that you push it out of the way so that your needle doesn't hit it. It shouldn't be in the way of the stitching your zipper, but that pull, if you have a bigger one like me, it could try to get under the needle. Let's open this up, and I'm going to have my seam under this top band that's attached to the zipper, and we're going to top stitch there to have the seam attached and laying flat to the top band or that band above the zipper. Here is how my lining looks. This is adorable. I could not be loving this anymore. I'm going to start working on my exterior now. Here are the pieces you're going to need to make that exterior. We have pattern piece number 3, number 5, number 1, and then we have a handle and the other piece for the connector. Currently, the only thing I have any fleece on is this piece right here, my flap piece. The pattern tells you to go ahead and attach all these pieces individually. I wish I would have waited to attach the flap and then sewn this all together and then added that interfacing. I'm going to use fleece on mine, but you could definitely use foam. If you are using glass bottles, if you have glass makeup bottles, foam would probably be better for protection. This is not going to be that heavy duty, so I'm going to use fleece. What I'm going to do in my other ones is I'll sew up my entire exterior and then add my fusible fleece. You can definitely add it piece by piece. Just remember to keep it out of the seam allowance and follow the pattern instructions for how you do attach the fleece. For like this middle panel, you keep it out of the seam allowance on both sides so that it's not caught in the seam when you attach this middle piece. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and sew it. Just know that I'm going to, at the end, have this entire piece stabilized with a fleece to add a little bit more security and structure to the bag. Another thing I'm doing differently is the handle. The handle for this bag is really just kind of like a hanging strap. It's very small. I'm using this for a child to carry, so I did add quite a bit of length to mine. If you're using this for a toiletry bag, of course it makes sense to have a very small handle so you could just hang it up on a hook. I'm doing this differently. Definitely make sure you do yours how you want. But we're going to attach this handle to the straight part of this flap. So it will be caught in the seam allowance here, and so it can be held by this section there. So the way you'll do it is you will find your center mark for your flap, and then you will place the handle according to the pattern instructions. If you're just doing the strap, I'm going to make mine a little bit wider, of course, because I'm doing this. If I did it really close, it just wouldn't be a really good handle. So I'm going to separate mine a little bit so that I can make mine a good holding strap, a good handle, and I'm just going to base those edges into place. For the other part of the connector, you're going to center it down here on this bottom piece. That will be number 3 if you're a pattern piece. So you're going to center it, and then the pattern tells us we can sew a box. I'm just going to basically baste it into place. We are going to add binding around this, so I'll have 2 rows of stitches there, and I feel like that'll be secure enough for me on mine. So I'm going to get these 2 pieces in place, and then you're going to see me baste both of these together, and then we will move on to the next step. And now what we need to do is we need to attach all these pieces together. So this is actually going to look like it's upside down. My middle piece, which is my piece 5, and my piece 3 are going to be sewn together first, and they are going to be going, the bottom where you attach that connector is actually going to be going to the bottom of this piece 5, because when we flip them around, that will have everything the correct way, I think. Yep, looks good. So we are going to attach those pieces right sides together, and we're going to sew them with the seam allowance given in the pattern. The pattern doesn't tell us to top stitch, but I'm probably going to top stitch. I'm probably going to open these seams up, then add that fleece, and then top stitch down both sides. My fleece is fusible, so that'll already be kind of secure, but doing a row of top stitching across here will help flatten out the seam. I like the way it looks, and so I'm going to do that even though that's not in the pattern instructions. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and add this top piece. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this top piece, the flat edge is going to go with the flat edge of this panel, and I'm going to just sew these together with the seam allowance given in the pattern. So this is how my exterior looks. So everything is correct. I have the proper orientation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press my seams open. I'm going to add stabilizer. This does feel pretty soft. I think I'm still going to go with the fleece though. I'm going to top stitch down both sides of my seam. What we have to do now is we have to put the exterior and the lining right sides together. For the exterior, I did go ahead and add the fleece. I did use my heat press knowing that it would compress the webbing handle here, and I really like the way that looks actually. I don't know, it just looks really professional. I did add top stitching, so I have everything ready to go. I'm going to put these two pieces wrong sides together, and I'm going to baste it from the lining side because I have that buckle. But whenever I do the binding, I'll probably go ahead and do the binding from the exterior just to make for sure it looks really good, but it will be a slight bit tricky with that buckle there. Everything should match up pretty perfectly. If it doesn't, just trim and adjust so you have as close as you can fit to it being evenly spaced. After I sewed the lining and exterior together, I took this over to my cutting mat just to make sure everything looked straight. My bottom looked a little uneven, and it was, so I just used a rotary cutter to just kind of even that out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this from the exterior side. Here is that buckle piece. I'm going to sew over it with it going down, but I'm going to keep it up for right now as a reminder, so that I don't forget it's there, so that I can fix it whenever I'm going around to make sure it's laying correctly and out of the way so my needle doesn't hit it. Also, I don't want to sew over it crooked, like I don't want it to shift, so that's just kind of a reminder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start my binding here on this side. The way I start my binding, and you can see my binding is very wide. I just like a thicker binding. Gives me plenty of room, and I just feel it adds a nice contrast. So I'm going to start the binding by placing it right sides together with the exterior. I'm going to fold down the raw edge, and that will give me a finished edge. I'm going to go ahead and sew this all the way around with the seam allowance given the pattern. I'll back stitch when I start and stop. When I get down to the corner, not the curves at the top are going to be just fine, but the two bottom corners, I'm going to miter those corners. So I'll show you how that looks when we get there. When you get down to the bottom of this corner, you want to stop about 1/4 of an inch away from the bottom. Go ahead and back stitch, then break your stitches. Then what I do is I take that excess material and I'm going to fold it back. What I want to do is I want to create an angle along this side here, and then I want it to be a completely straight line here at the top. This is the way it should look. Then what I do is I'm going to fold it so that it is even with this raw edge. So I will fold it back onto itself. And here is that folded edge. Go ahead and lay the rest of your material along the side to keep it out of the way. I'm going to put a clip here just so I can move my hands and show you what it looks like, but I typically don't clip, I just hold it. So the raw edge is flush with the raw edge of the bottom of the bag. We have a folded edge here, we have a raw edge here, and you can see we're back to right sides together again with the binding. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sewing down here. This will be left open. Do not sew any of this part. Start sewing here at the bottom, back stitching when you start and stop there again. We will sew in a straight line till we get to the next corner and repeat those same steps there. When you get to these curves, you're going to go slowly and kind of shape the binding so that it matches that curved edge. You'll have to kind of adjust every few stitches so that you do not sew over a pucker or a pleat while still keeping the seam allowance. We're getting close to this buckle. I'm going to make sure I lay it down. I'll probably have to do just kind of a lifting up to adjust for that bulk there and still be able to get a proper stitch. So I'm using my fingers to hold the webbing firm in place so it stays straight and I don't have any shifting. I don't need to back stitch over that because I've already got one row of stitching. This is my second. Then when we flip the binding, we'll have a third row. Where I come down to the beginning of the binding, I'm going to go a little bit further past that and cut my binding. You wouldn't want to cut where you have a seam because then that would degrade that integrity of that seam, so you'd want to definitely cut below that. Then I'm going to fold this raw edge up so that it is going to make a finished edge. I love to have them completely meet, so the raw edges are meeting there in the middle. You can see how they're kind of meeting up. That distributes the bulk and it ensures that I have an even finish on the bag, that all the raw edges are covered nicely. Back stitch when you start and stop. And then make sure you have your seam proper. 1/4 of an inch is what I'm doing on mine. I always like to go back and make for sure. I think I had one spot here where I got a little small on the corner, on the curve here. So I'm going to go back and repeat this just to make sure I get that full seam. And now what I do is I start turning it to the side. Just go ahead on your corners, poke them through, and just have everything flipping so you can see all of the binding coming through. Then what I want to do is I want to fold the raw edge so that it's flush with that edge and see if that will be a perfect fit. That's a little still too big for mine, so I want to fold it a little more. I knew I cut my binding a little wide. But what I want to do is I want to fold this binding, whatever you cut yours at, you want to fold it so that this folded edge, the finished edge, just covers that previous row of stitching. When you stitch around this next time with that same seam allowance, it's going to match perfectly. Start with your straight edges and clip all the way around, taking the time. This is the most important part of binding, is making sure you take your time to get everything covered really nice. Some people will use a glue. You can use a typical the white school glue to base this in place and hit it with an iron to kind of secure it down. I just use clips though. Around the curves, it won't be any problem when we're folding. We're just going to kind of adjust to make sure it fits evenly. But for the corners, the miter corners, the bottom, what we'll do is we'll save these two corners for last. So I'm going to go off camera and clip all the way around. When I come back, I'll show you how to do these corners, and then we'll sew it up all together and have this bag almost completely done. I have the binding clipped all around except here at the bottom. At the bottom, I leave this step for last, and I just kind of use my finger to push in to make sure it's nice and flat, and then I simply just fold it over. That's all I do. Super simple there, but I do want to show how that's a little bit different. Now, on the binding, I spend so much time clipping and putting everything together. That is why I don't do that on camera, because it'd be such a waste of your time. I really go around several times. I make sure that everything is even. This step to me is the most important step. After I spend the time to get this binding just really matching up nice and even, everything looks straight, then I can sew from this exterior side pretty much stress-free, because I have taken the time to make sure the seam is matching up. That folded edge on the lining is just perfectly matching where I just sewed. So whenever I do the same seam allowance on the exterior, it should catch beautifully and I shouldn't have any problems. Don't forget when you come up here to the top to make sure that you are not hitting your hardware and you're not creating any shifting. You shouldn't have problems this time, but still just be aware of that. When you come down to the corner, make sure that before you pivot, your needle is going through both sides of the binding. So looking at the binding from the exterior, everything looks good. Now let's flip it over and just hope that we did everything correct. Everything looks great. Perfect. I have a little bit of a wonky spot here. Could fix that if I wanted to. Probably won't though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go off camera and get it clipped in place. So this is the way that the bag really wanted to go together for me. So maybe not the perfect way, because when you look over on this side, I don't have it perfectly with the seams, but it just seemed like it wanted to fold better this way. It's not going to really matter too much at this point, because it'll be, once it's filled with things, it'll probably lay a little bit differently. So here is the handle. I love that I made the handle bigger. I think it's super cute. I am so in love with this pattern. Definitely melt your webbing in just to make sure it's really nice and secure. I'm leaving my webbing long in case it does end up fraying. That way they could still cut it off and have it to be non-fraying at the end. I'm going to put the clips back on and compress it to get everything laying right, but I am in love with this pattern. This was such a fun sew. Didn't take me long to cut, didn't take me long to sew. I think this would be great for my craft shows. For me, this is going to be great for kids. Definitely good for toiletries as well. What a great Christmas gift this would be if you made it for a young girl and then just put some lotion, some lip balm, some hair bows and things in there. You give her the carrying case, you give her a few supplies. I just think it's adorable. Super love the pattern. Definitely try out this pattern. If you don't have it already, I'm going to have a link for it in the description. Also, my prints, both this coordinating print and the panel are from K&A Custom Fabrics. We'll have the information for that in my description as well. And today in your sewing room, I hope that you are pleasantly surprised when you try to sew up a new pattern by how much you love it, how quick it comes together, and how beneficial it's going to be to the recipient. Thanks so much for watching another one of my tutorials, and I hope that you have an amazing day today.